Hey guys, welcome back into the Is AI Coming for Your Job podcast. I'm your host, Jack Forrester. Before we get started, just want to remind you that you can send your comments or questions to aiandyourjob@gmail.com. That's in the show notes, or it will be. Let me know what you do for work and how susceptible you think your job might be to being augmented or replaced by AI. Also, please subscribe and rate the show in whatever platform you're utilizing to listen. I will say that the feedback I've received so far from both friends and strangers has told me that this podcast is informative. I guess a lot of these folks were unaware of AI and where it's at and where it's going. But at the same time, those folks are still, I would say, in large part, still skeptical of AI and the ability to replace their work. And I will say, not to offend anybody, but the older the person is, the more skeptical they are of AI replacing them in the short or long term. It could be that they don't care as much because they've worked the bulk of their career and are planning to retire in the next 10 to 15 years. In that regard, I'm a bit envious of them insofar that they get to work an entire career. Some of us may not. But again, just from the limited sample size I have, the older the person, the more skeptical they are of AI taking their job from them. So maybe we need to do a larger study, but that's been the story in my case. So let's jump into some recent headlines from Forbes. Quote, Goldman Sachs predicts 2/3 of jobs in the U.S. and Europe and around 300 million jobs worldwide will be lost or degraded by artificial intelligence, end quote. Now, I should make clear that this report is talking about a specific type of work. It's really focusing on the type of work that can be replaced by generative artificial intelligence or tools like ChatGPT. So let's think large language models. So think back to that list we discussed in the initial episode. Think administrative positions, legal positions, paralegals and attorneys, customer service, computer programmers, and even some engineering fields can be heavily augmented by AI. Concerning computer programmers or coding, somewhere around 2015, not long after I began to think about AI and its impact, I took several coding courses in an effort to diversify my skills and even potentially make a career change. Some of you may remember when Learn to Code became a meme in the face of layoffs of journalists at BuzzFeed and the Huffington Post. This was in 2019. And even prior to that, news outlets made headlines covering coding as an option for displaced coal miners. Well, it turns out that ChatGPT is a formidable coder and it's only going to get better. So those of us who thought we could pivot to tech may not be able to do so. It's hard not to imagine that programmers will be heavily augmented or even displaced by this technology. Some of the initial feedback that I received from the first episode was that I should highlight how to resist the tides of AI as it relates to work. And I certainly wish I could. I mean, I've thought about this every way imaginable. Should I go back to school and become a nurse or maybe go into teaching? I certainly think that both of these can be rewarding in their own right, but that's quite a leap to make in midlife. And I bring up nursing and teaching specifically because I think they'll be around much longer than traditional white-collar jobs. ChatGPT type technology can definitely aid and assist in both of those professions, teaching more so. And it's even been said that it could replace teachers altogether. But I think we're a long way off from wanting our children to be taught exclusively by technology. It'll take some time for society to wrap its head around that. And nursing requires a tremendous amount of dexterity or, use of fingers for delicate movements. And it will be some time before technology is capable of that. Or, should I jump into the trades or blue-collar work? I mean, I grew up in a blue-collar family and worked in my childhood some. and I'm not a stranger to that kind of work. But with teaching, nursing, or becoming a woodworker, I mean, it would require a tremendous shift in my life. And while I'm certain that my work will be impacted and eventually replaced by AI, it may not be displaced for another 10 years. I don't know. It's difficult to know. So the smart money is probably ongoing with getting out ahead of this thing and jumping into a profession with some staying power, because if we take this to its logical conclusion, there will be a mass retraining of folks mid-career into professions they've never anticipated going into. And if that's the case, those jobs like nursing, teaching, and woodworking will become much more exclusive than they are today. There is some hope. That same Goldman Sachs report states that while the impact on the labor market will be significant, most jobs and industries are only partially exposed to automation and are thus more likely to be complemented rather than substituted by AI. But let's remember back to last episode where we talked about increased efficiencies leading to less positions. If everyone is more efficient, our original team of 7 people may need to be cut down to 4. So there's still potential for that. That report from Goldman Sachs also states that technological innovation that initially displaces human workers has historically also created employment and economic growth over the long term. This is a common trope often brought up in AI conversations as it relates to work, though let's remember that Kai-Fu Lee states that AI's employment impact is not one of job creation, but of job replacement. He's much more skeptical that jobs will be created to replace those eliminated by AI. Though it's safe to say that some new jobs will be created, it's just extremely hard to visualize what those jobs might be. I'm not certain how many robot repairmen will be needed, but whatever new jobs are created, it would require mass retraining of the existing workforce. And really nowhere on the horizon have I seen a centralized effort to prepare for such a shift, at least until the last week, which we'll talk about in our second headline for the week. But first, I want to play this scenario out a bit more. If 300 million people across the world, and 2/3 of those being jobs in the U.S. and Europe, are at risk of being eliminated or even degraded by AI, what does that do to the U.S. or world economy? When you think of a consumer-driven economy, which the U.S. is, and then think about the buying power being removed from the consumer, then it's not difficult to imagine an economic disaster. However, it is hard to imagine that level of displacement in such a short term. And I would say this makes me somewhat hopeful. I mean, because what good will it do technology companies to have a technology to sell to a company that doesn't have any customers? If AI puts me out of a job, or even if it creates a situation in which I'm underemployed, meaning I could only work a portion of the time I used to work because AI is doing part of my job, it will remove some or all of my purchasing power, which means the disposable income I would have used will be no longer available, creating a downstream effect for all the businesses I support. Then multiply that by 100 million. That's not a roadmap for success. So again, I am hopeful in that it won't be beneficial for anyone to displace even 10 million workers in the short term, let alone 100 million. So for our second headline this week, from the Washington Post, quote, Elon Musk discusses AI regulation with Senator Schumer, end quote. Not a great headline, I'll admit. But Elon Musk went to Washington this week to meet with congressional leadership on regulating AI. So just for a high-level overview, each of the last three, the current, I should say, administration and the last two administrations have all taken some action as it relates to AI, but not in the way of regulation. Though to be fair, the last three administrations probably didn't foresee the speed of which AI technologies would progress or develop. In any case, the Obama administration compiled and released a comprehensive report back in 2016 detailing plans for furthering AI technologies and planning for its impact. Trump signed an executive order in 2019 that sought to further research investment, allow for the federal system's data resources to be utilized, the massive amounts of data that the U.S. federal government has to further AI research and to try and understand the impact on the U.S. workforce. Trump's administration also launched the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Office, and most recently, the Biden administration's Office of Science and Technology released a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. I'll link to that in the show notes. It's if you're a nerd, it's worth checking out. But no bill of substance has yet been passed, though. With recent developments, the conversation is growing. So, and Representative Ted Lieu of California floated a bill to be voted on to regulate AI, and it was written by AI. The bill itself didn't make it anywhere, but I'm hopeful that we'll see more action as it relates to AI regulation due to the release and the ability of ChatGPT 3 and 4, or I guess 3.5 and 4. ChatGPT really showcases how fast things are moving and how much of an impact it can have, and hopefully visits from Elon and others in the field will help prompt discussions and actions in the short term. I don't want to short sell any other issues in the country, as there are many. The crisis in Sudan, the Ukraine-Russia war, inflation, domestic and social concerns. These are all big things that need to be dealt with. However, I think the argument can be made that the threat of AI or an AI gone wrong or even a benevolent AI and its impact on society and the economy is enough to warrant that it gets moved to the top of the pile or to the front of the line for discussion and regulation. For our last article this week is from Futurism.com. Quote, Marvel director expects fully AI-generated movies within 2 years, end quote. That's a very short timeline. But the director, his name is Joe Russo. He's directed some big-time movies like Avengers Endgame. He thinks the technology will move that quickly and eventually will get to a point where anyone, and I mean anyone, can create, using AI, their own movies using AI. I should note that Joe Russo sits on the board of some AI companies, so he does have some insight into the technology and its ability. He thinks it will get to a point where you can ask the AI to create a movie with, say, a young Denzel Washington. I say young, but young or old Denzel Washington is good. But I say young because AI will be able to replicate the young actor Denzel Washington. So you could create a movie with a person that hasn't really existed for 40 years. But let's just say you want a movie with Denzel in it and you wanted it to be a cop thriller or whatever you want it to be. You put in your prompts and then a movie is generated based off of those prompts. Or say you want yourself to be in a movie with Denzel and your face is used to generate a character alongside Denzel. You could do it. Now, I assume that Denzel and actors like him would want to be compensated for their likeness being used, or maybe Hollywood even blocks this type or tries to block this type of technology from being used outside of Hollywood, because it would truly democratize the movie and TV industry. I guess these are all sorts of things that need to be figured out. But if this is true, if you can create a Hollywood quality movie using an AI technology from your home by entering some prompts, we're headed for a different world. I mean, what's the world going to be like 5 to 10 years from now? And I'm having trouble wrapping my head around being able to create something like that. But according to this guy, Joe Russo, it's not far away. And it's not limited to entertainment or movies. I mean, think about the applications you could use it elsewhere. So let's talk about ethics, AI ethics specifically. Back in 2017, a group of AI researchers met to develop some governing principles at the Asilomar Conference Center in Pacific Grove, California. This is one of the earliest sets of principles known for governance of AI. Of the 23 principles developed, almost half of them centered around ethics, safety, failure transparency, judicial transparency, responsibility, human values, personal privacy, liberty and privacy, shared benefit, shared prosperity, human control, non-subversion, and AI arms race, or the prevention of an AI arms race. I'll link to those principles in the show notes so you can read them. I think it set up a good foundation for AI research, at least from my point of view. And it is reassuring that most of the creators and signers behind these principles are leading the explosion in AI technology today. So hopefully all of these values are being implemented into these AI technologies as we speak. Though even with these values and their narrow terms, it's safe to say that interpretation of them could vary widely from person to person. AI research guy A might not put as much emphasis on human values as AI research B. Something to think about. The skeptic in me thinks about the AI researcher in a lesser known lab that may not have the self-governance that the bigger labs have, and they may be tempted to launch a product into the world with known issues. And that's all it would take. I mean, all the other AI labs in the world could get it right, and one outlier could have a monumental impact on the rest of the world. One of the authors of those Asilomar principles was a guy named Max Tegmark. He's a leading AI researcher at MIT. He's a brilliant guy. He just did a podcast with Lex Friedman on AI, and he's ringing the bell over calling a halt to development until a comprehensive review could be completed to ensure safeguards are in place. He also wrote a book called Life 3.0, which I would highly recommend for thinking about the world to come. In that book, Life 3.0, he states, quote, "It's tricky to fully codify even widely accepted principles into a form applicable to future AI. And this problem deserves serious discussion and research as AI keeps progressing. In the meantime, however, let's not let perfect be the enemy of good. There are many examples of uncontroversial kindergarten ethics that can be and should be built into tomorrow's technology. Now that our machines are getting smart enough to have some information about what they're doing, it's time for us to teach them limits. Any engineer designing a machine needs to ask if there are things that it can but shouldn't do, and consider whether there's a practical way of making it impossible for a malicious or clumsy user to cause harm," end quote. So I think it's tremendous that the people involved with AI are asking these questions to themselves, and hopefully that these principles are being implemented. But while we're here, I want to talk about the use of the technologies, the AI technologies that are being built, and what that means for the future. So there's already a movement to advance the human race, so to speak, in the age of AI, as it relates to the physical body. Elon Musk has a company called Neuralink, in which the goal is to successfully integrate computers with the human mind. So essentially putting a chip into your brain. My immediate reaction to hearing about this was revulsion. The whole idea is unsettling, not to mention that we as Americans love our autonomy. And the minute you put a chip or mechanism for enhancement in your body, you're going to give up your autonomy and any sense of privacy you had. And that's unnerving. However, there are applications for such a technology that make it look attractive. Neuralink touts the technology's eventual ability to heal paralysis or neurological diseases as its initial selling point, and why they're doing the research. I have an immediate family member with a neurological disease, and seeing what that neurological disease does to them is heartbreaking, and it's obviously heartbreaking for that family member. That disease is more unnerving for me at the moment than the idea of integrating humans and technology. So much so that if the technology were available today, I'd be the first in line to try and get that technology for that family member. And me personally, I also had major back problems as a very young man. And eventual surgery corrected that issue. But prior to that surgery, I would have absolutely embraced the technology to block pain signals from traveling throughout my body. I wouldn't have cared about the potential negative impacts of doing so. And while this is a very big question that people are going to have to grapple with, remember that we're already walking around with supercomputers in our pockets. And while there is a vast difference in carrying a phone in your pocket and putting a chip in your brain, the two may not be as far apart as we think they are. But these are, again, decisions that everyone will have to make at some point in the future. But let's think beyond healthcare applications, because, like I said, I think that's step one. And then once those issues are resolved, the technology will be used for other applications. But what applications? So let's say that AI develops in such a way that you have to compete with AI for work. Would you integrate that technology with your brain to stay relevant? Or what if the technology exists and parents are integrating their children with the technology, putting a chip in their child's brain, to make them more competitive in an AI world, essentially making them superhuman? Would you allow your child to have this technology integrated into their body in order to keep up? Not doing so would make them irrelevant in some sense as it relates to education, work, etc. A major concern I have is how quickly we adopt technology without thinking about the consequences. The smartphone's only 10 or 15 years old, and it's such an integral part of our life that we can't imagine life without it. But we're only beginning to see the full ramifications of being attached to a phone all day. The CDC released a study earlier this year that showed record levels of sadness and depression in adolescent girls, which is directly related to the rise of smartphones. It's not difficult to draw a correlation between the impossible standards that teenagers have to see on social media and that leading to mass depression in teenagers. And yet, without much thought, we shove screens in front of our kids because it's much easier to entertain them that way than for us to have to put in the work to do so. And once you develop that constant stream of dopamine hits, it's a hard habit to break. And that will lead us to my final point for today. Let's talk about anxiety as it relates to AI. I'm a member of a few different professional organizations associated with my profession. I'm currently working towards a new certification in my field, and it's very difficult not to think about the futility of doing so with AI progressing as quickly as it is. I don't know that that certification will be worth anything at all in the next 4 to 7 years, but I do like to push myself, so all things considered, I'll probably still pursue that certification, though somewhere in the back of my mind, that move still seems questionable. And as a part of those professional organizations, I've been reviewing the message boards on those websites, and it's obvious that folks are already worried about AI and what it means for their work. The question of AI and how it will impact work is beginning to be the rule and not the exception on those message boards. Of course, both ends of the spectrum are represented in those conversations, and I'm using those message boards as a part of my sample size when I say that the older you are, in my experience, just speaking generally here, don't be offended, the older you are, the less convinced you are that AI will have any significant impact on your job. And I absolutely hope that they are right. But the one thing that is evident is that from these conversations happening, I should say, is that AI will have some impact on work. The question is, how much of an impact will that be? I've also been reviewing various conferences to go to later this year. All of the organizations are now highlighting AI and integration of AI as a part of the conference agenda. When I checked earlier in the year, that was not the case. A few of them did, but I think with ChatGPT creating the buzz it did, it prompted people to shut down and retool so that they could make AI part of their conference. And I don't fault them for it. I mean, if they want to remain relevant, I think they have to embrace it for the future. So I'm curious about the impact of unemployment or even the potential of underemployment and what that will do for society. Leave aside the fact that anytime you turn the news on, it appears as if the world is on fire. And in some cases, it literally is. According to the New York Times, prior to the pandemic, almost 16% of American adults took prescription pills for mental health. That number shot up to almost 25%, so almost a quarter of our population during the pandemic, people took prescription pills for mental health to deal with the loss and uncertainty that came with the pandemic. I'm not sure how mass unemployment or underemployment will sit with society that's already struggling with mental health, but it doesn't seem like a recipe for success. Again, while it's hard not to be cynical, I'm hopeful that the answers will present themselves as we go along. Those on the left would say that it's the government's job to care for or provide for the people, and those on the right would say let the market sort it out. I'm a bit of a moderate, the most hated group, I think. So I think it will need to be a combination of both. I think to let AI develop without regulation would be suicide. So I'm hopeful that both these conversations happening in Washington around AI regulation and also that the tech community will embrace AI safety over profit, but we'll see. So that's it for this week. Next week, or maybe 2 weeks from now, I'm not sure. Depends on how my schedule shakes out. I want to look at white collar versus blue collar, and we'll talk about how AI will come for white collar and blue collar, as it does not discriminate. I think it may discriminate against white collar a bit sooner than it does blue collar, but both are very much susceptible to AI. So again, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Send your questions and comments or feedback to aiandyourjob@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk next time.